Thank you very much, Tom. Just checking with you, I am sharing my screen right now. Can you see it?
Yeah, we see it just fine.
Okay, excellent, excellent. All right. So just one moment here. All right. Well, as mentioned, this session is about fundamentals of leading technical teams. In my case, I first started leading technical teams in my 20s, back when I worked at NASA for a few years, did not lead anyone, but then I worked for the U.S. Army Missile Command down in Huntsville, Alabama, if anyone here knows about the Redstone Arsenal. And so I led my first team back at that time. It was myself and 5 other people. We were developers writing products for writing software. And I was terrible. I was enthusiastic, but I wasn't really good at it. And so this presentation is a distillation of 30 years of me leading teams of different kinds, and sometimes successfully, sometimes with a little bit of struggle. But the gist is, I think this will give you a good idea of where you might need to study further and additional resources that you can take advantage of, as well as me. So you've got my contact info there in terms of Twitter, LinkedIn, and so forth. My email address is kevin.kline@solarwinds.com. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions as well. I'll be posting these slides, and I'm also a technologist, right? I'm very deep into the technology. Been a Microsoft MVP since I was awarded in 2004 for the 2003 year. And so I've been deep in the technologies. My most well-known book is SQL in a Nutshell, although I've been author or co-author on 11 books in total. So yeah, I'm kind of an older version perhaps of yourself, right? And so what we have is a Venn diagram, right? We are tech professionals typically, and what happens is we're taught a bunch of technology skills, or maybe we've even learned them ourselves. And so this is a big part of the Venn diagram of our skill sets. And unfortunately, many companies over time, many organizations they have a ceiling for technologists in terms of salary. And so in order for you to get a better salary after a certain point, the only way you can do that is to become a manager of some sort, maybe a team leader, supervisor, a mid-level manager, and so forth. And so all the things that made us successful in these Venn diagrams, there's very little overlap between what made us great as a technologist and what makes us a great manager and what makes us a great influencer or motivator, right? So things that we are typically taught and make us successful, there's lots of that information around. Pass.org has hundreds or even thousands of hours of deep technology sessions that you can watch on YouTube. There's all kinds of other groups and communities, many local user groups and things like that, just lots and lots. But you'll find that there's very little about how to manage a team well, and even less about how to be influential. And so I actually started to develop this kind of training content when I was the president of PASS. And one of the things that we saw year after year was that these fantastically skilled technologists would be elected to the board of directors of the Professional Association for SQL Server, and yet they really struggled in the boardroom because they didn't have these other skills. They didn't fill out this Venn diagram really well. They were really just in this top circle. And so they would throw out ideas and not win support. They would propose programs and not win support. They were in leadership over groups of volunteers and they weren't motivated. So I started to build this content at that time for my peers on the board of directors. But as it turns out, people started to ask and others started to refer people to my content. And so hopefully this will be good, useful information for you, okay? Now, in any kind of career progression, we have to start with ourselves, right? And one of the things that's difficult about leading teams is that you're actually in the middle of a lot of different people, okay? And although I'm not sure it's how true it is, there is some truth to the stereotype that information technology professionals are a little bit on the introverted side. So the first thing that I find when many of my friends and colleagues get this promotion, they're having to talk to a lot more people than they used to. As an individual contributor, for example, you only have to worry about this lower left box here. What do you do? But when you become a manager, you have to respond and lead your team. And then you have to meet the expectation of your bosses and those higher up from you. So it's one of these situations that's very demanding, and it frequently surprises a lot of people when they move into leadership. About 50% of the time, technologists who get promoted to become a team leader or a manager, about 50% of the time, they walk away from it. They're like, you know what? I think I'll go back to being a DBA or a data engineer or a data analyst. It's not where I wanted my career to go, but at least I can handle the expectations. So keep that in mind. You've got a lot of people you have to begin conversations with and maintain the momentum in those relationships. And it's incumbent on you to do that. So it may take a very significant investment of your energy to make this happen and to be successful at it. This is a two-way street of communication. So you have to ask things of your boss, but you also have to report to your boss. Same way with the teams. They expect you to provide them with information and direction, and yet you need to build a feedback loop with them so that they're constantly communicating with you. In addition to that, on this lower left-hand side, that's something I want to talk about in more detail. What do you do? And so one of the things that I have found as well with our progression into leadership is that what's the worst manager of all? If you ever read fiction or look at the newspapers or anything like that, well, it's the pointy-haired boss from the Dilbert cartoon, right? And the thing about the pointy-haired boss is he has no self-awareness. You may have experienced this in your own teams, in which the person who most needs leadership training, like what we're doing right now, the person who most needs that is the least likely person to go to a session teaching those kinds of principles because they don't think they need anything, right? They think they're complete. But you're different. You're inquisitive. You want to know how to do this as well as you can. And so one area that gets frequently overlooked is making and taking the time to understand your own character and your own quirks and quibbles and unique aspects of your own personality. And so there's also a difference too between character and personality. Okay? So in case you haven't ever thought of it, character, and I'll read the definition, character is the aggregate features and traits that form the individual nature of some person or thing. And if you look it up in the dictionary, you'll see a second definition, which is the moral and ethical quality of a person, okay? Personality, on the other hand, is just the visible aspects of a person, of one's character, as it impresses others. So personality would be something like, oh, that person is really funny. But character would be, that person is really caring. Caring, in this case, is something you do when you're in the room with someone, or you're not in the room, that person isn't there. And I've heard people say that character is what you do when and how you behave when no one is watching. Personality is all about interacting with other people and what's visible. So analyze your character. Spend some time thinking about that. If your character is one in which you're short-tempered, well, maybe maybe management and leadership are not for you. If you're highly critical all the time, again, this is a characteristic, an element of your character that is going to be difficult in a management situation. And so it's the kind of thing you need some awareness of. Another thing that's kind of important about character is that organizations will reflect the character of their top leaders. And so maybe you're in a company where you don't like the top leaders. They don't match your definition of ethical or highly moral people. Well, if you are, then don't go for a promotion in that organization, because at some point they're going to ask you to do something that doesn't match your moral standards. And so you may be in a very, very difficult, emotionally laden situation sometime in the future, because I can tell you, if those managers act and the C-suite act that way, it will definitely reveal itself later. That's one of the big issues with what they call bro culture, where it's all a bunch of young men who are like athletes, really competitive, and they harass people, right? So the top leaders, what they do and what they fail to do is modeled throughout the organization. So keep that in mind. Now, you're going to hear me talk about this a lot. Coaching leaders. We're going to dive into that in a second. But really successful leaders in the Western world, it's different in other cultures of the world, by the way. So not all cultures acclimate to this approach well. But what we're looking for is authenticity, okay? That's the first thing that we're looking for. And so a coach could be really hard on his team, let's say a basketball team, but if all the players on that team knows that the coach cares about them and knows that the coach wants what's best for the team, they will accept that behavior, even though it's a little bit, grating, a little bit rough, because they understand the authentic character of their coach. And they agree that it's a good character. May not be an easy character, but it's one that I can get along with, because I know they have a good place in their heart. They're going in the right direction. So that's the kind of thing that you want to model yourself as a leader. One way to express authenticity, if you're interested, is to admit your weaknesses. So a lot of people feel like, I can't admit my weaknesses. I have to show everything is perfection. Perfectionists. Perfectionism is a behavior that comes from insecurity. And so it's okay to say, hey, you know what? As your basketball coach, I'm personally not a great shooter. I'm not that good at it, but I can help you be a better shooter. And so being authentic actually kind of improves your relationship with the people you manage, because they have faults and weaknesses too, okay? Again, we'll touch on this in more detail in just a moment. The other thing about once you're in leadership roles is remember that people are watching everything you do. They're also comparing it to what you say. If there's a big mismatch, you're going to lose points, because people are going to say, okay, this person's character is deficient in some way, right? Maybe they'll begin to assign character traits to you, like hypocritical or two-faced or insincere. You don't want that to happen. But remember, what you do, or in some cases, omit doing, is how people formulate an opinion about your character. And so be aware, people are watching you, and if you are successful, and are authentic and doing good things, then they'll actually try to emulate your behavior, okay? One thing I always like to joke about in this whole situation is, if you feel like, oh, I know myself okay, but I want to learn more. Well, the joke is, maybe you're old enough to remember these commercials from the early 2000s, where you got John Hodgman. He's like, I'm a PC. He's really square, he's really fuddy-duddy. And then you got the cool guy, Justin Long, and he's like, I'm a Mac, hey. And then we got all these people who are not self-aware. And it's like, I'm Linux, baby. And so we have a situation where people don't realize much about themselves. And so everybody else is going to be looking at them like, wow, what's going on? How did you get promoted? Are you a nephew of the boss? What's going on here? So again, I have like a whole hour just on this topic, and let me know if you're interested in it. But if you've never done it before, what I would encourage you to do is look at a couple of my favorite psychometric tests. The key to a psychometric test, measuring of personality and character traits, is that you have to be completely honest with those tests. When you are completely honest with your tests, then you're going to get some insight into who you are and how you prefer to behave. And that's what people are watching, what you do, right? So the simplest of the two that I really like is called DISC, and it stands for the four main characteristics that people express in work situations. Then we have the Myers-Briggs test. So DISC has four main traits. Direct, inspirational, steady, and careful is what those identify as. So the C, for example, in this test is all about how much time you take to make sure that everything is going well. And if you're an analyst, for example, that means you're going to collect a ton of data, maybe more than other people do. And guess what? The majority of DBAs are Cs, sometimes strong Cs, because they have to be careful. Their job is to make sure the database is secure, reliable, backed up, recoverable. Kind of makes sense, right? In the Myers-Briggs test, you have more outcomes. You can have up to 16 different personality types. And it's actually my favorite of the two, but they're both very useful. And so if you wanted to have a conversation on Twitter about it, or social media, or even an email, I love to discuss that kind of stuff. And so when you take that test with an honest heart, it's going to help you understand a lot about yourself. And what you need to do then is factor that in to how you lead a team. So if it turns out you're not a great details person, well, identify someone on your team who is, and encourage them to be your wingman, your helper, to make sure all the details are double checked. So we'll get into that a little bit more though. So the leadership style that you employ can have many, many forms. The thing that is kind of great about leadership, though, is that in the West, in our universities and management consulting firms and different organizations like that, leadership is very, very extensively studied because it makes a huge difference to the success of organizations. And let's be honest, it helps them make money. But this information also applies to those of us who are not in money-making organizations, like in the universities of the world and not-for-profit organizations, in education, in the military. So what we see most commonly in the Western world is two main styles. And one is much more successful at the organizational level than the other. And so let's just go through some of these and some of the characteristics of them. We have one type who's sometimes called the autocrat, sometimes called the director or dictator. And so this is a person who tells his or her employees what to do. They kind of hoard information because that makes them more powerful and irreplaceable. And rather than building autonomy in their teams, they build dependency. Like, don't you dare make a decision about rolling back this database without telling me and getting my approval first. So we find in these situations, what happens with the team is, as the director intends, the dictator intends, everybody on their team relies entirely on that person, that leader. On the other hand, we see those who are of a coaching orientation. Their idea is sometimes called servant leadership. And it was a style that I learned about a long time ago and have It's driven to maintain. And in this case, the coaching leader will collaborate with the team. They'll ask for consensus. They'll ask for everybody to put their heads together and think about things. If no one on their team knows much about the particular challenge, they'll network with people outside of their team or even outside of their organization to build more institutional knowledge. Once they get that knowledge, they'll share it with everybody because that makes the team as a whole more effective. They like for their team members to be self-managing rather than dependent on them. They'll say things like, you don't need to call me at 12 in the night, midnight to make a decision whether you should or shouldn't roll back this database. You know what the priorities are. You decide. And so they encourage more autonomy. So which of the two do you think is more successful? If you wanted to respond in the chat, I'd love to see that here. But yeah, what happens is if you have a leader who is a director, what happens is the staff under that director only wants to do exactly what the director asks and nothing more. Right? Everybody's saying coach, and that's right. What happens when you're the autocrat and you order people to do things is that's all they're going to do and never anything more than that. Because if they do something wrong, they'll be punished. Whereas the coach evaluates success not in terms of their own power and authority. They measure success in terms of how well the team accomplishes the team goals. And so if I'm not in the office and one of my direct reports knows that there's something they need to do and they are in the office, they won't even ask me. They'll just do it, right? And that is great. I love that, right? As a coach and as a leader of this group of people. And in fact, that's how I want to be treated. So it reciprocates, and that's a very important aspect of being a good leader as well. Okay, so let's move forward. So good leadership in action. Let's talk about that. And leadership is action, right? A lot of people are in a position of leadership, but they're not leaders. And it's probably because they don't do any of these things well, or maybe they only do one or two of these things well, okay? So we're gonna spend a slide each on each of these different topics, okay? And coaching, facilitating good communications, meeting team goals, and supporting change and ideas. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this last one because there's an enormous amount of variability on that. And also, I actually have starting tomorrow a session leading through a 3-part series on influence, motivation, and persuasion. And so those 3 sessions actually go into this idea of change and supporting ideas a bit more. So we're going to spend time on coaching, facilitation of communications, and meeting team goals. But again, if you want to be a good leader, all those years you spent building up technology skills, they don't show up on this list. So again, that's a tough kind of balancing act you have to adjust to. In fact, another common question that comes up, which we'll hold till later, is when people move into management, us technologists, and they actually like it and they're doing pretty good. The next question that they run into is, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much time this would take. How do I keep my technical skills sharp? Because I want to be both a technologist and a manager and leader. So if we have time, we'll address that question later. So good leadership is action. And so one of those actions is communication. And so good communication requires you to exhibit certain behaviors. And these are the sort of things that I encourage you to practice. Now, in my case, what I do when I need to practice something is I actually, and I have right here on my desk on my laptop, I take out Post-it notes and I write down things that I need to keep doing over and over again, because every time I look at the screen, I'll see it and it'll remind me. So a lot of people will say, okay, yeah, I got it. I know I need to be a good questioner or a good listener, but they don't have anything to remind them of doing that. And so they never develop the habit of being a good communicator. So one of the things that you need to do with in our technology teams is you need to develop questioning skills. So one of the big things that I see happen often is people do not use the open question approach. They use closed questions. So they'll say something like, one of your team members requests your feedback on something, and you'll say, think that's a good idea? Well, that's a closed-ended question. There's really only two answers to that, yes or no. But that doesn't give you all the information you need as a leader to actually give them good coaching. You need to ask an open-ended question that invites conversation. So you might ask, what are our alternatives here? Oh, okay. So now the person you're talking to could give you paragraphs of information. Well, boss, one thing we could do is nothing. We could do the least expensive option. We could do this medium one, but if we really want to do it well and never have a problem with this again, we should actually spend a little money and do this third option. So now you've gotten so much more information than you did if you use the closed question approach. Also, a lot of times we don't discriminate between fact and values or opinion. So sometimes we'll say, okay, what's the best approach in this situation? Or what are our alternatives? But then the response we get is, oh, I hate these alternatives. None of them are any good. Well, that's an opinion or values-based response. It's not based on fact. So then you have to do what is on the first bullet point there. You have to drive the conversation towards specifics. Okay, well, you don't like any of them, but what is it quantitatively that you don't like about it? It's like, oh, well, the user interface is so slow. It's like, okay, that's a good specific. And it doesn't do 30%, but it only does 30% of what we want. Oh, well, that's a great fact to know. So sometimes people will give you value when you want facts, or vice versa. And so you need to use those open-ended questions to drive to a real situation, a real resolution. And also be attentive in the conversation too, observing actions and reactions when a person communicates with you. As the experts say, about 75% of what someone is telling you is actually conveyed through their body language, their posture, their demeanor, their voice, and so forth. So it's very important that you pay attention when somebody is speaking to you. And I find that this has really gotten worse over time because people always have their cell phones in their hand. So when someone's communicating to you, or you are trying to get to the core of something important, ask for everybody to put away their phones and say, hey, this is important. Let's put our phones down for a second. The other thing, listening skills, okay? So it's important to do things like acknowledging when someone is speaking. You've been in Zoom meetings, or maybe if you are a speaker like myself, you'll hear people complain that they're like, I love teaching a class where I can see people interacting and I can see if they're interested and I can see when a light bulb goes on. That's so exciting. But I hate it when I have to do that now on Zoom because I can't see any feedback from the people I'm talking to. Well, that's an important kind of expression of the idea of acknowledging statements, right? So your listening skills can be improved just by you saying, okay, I get it, or mm-hmm, or even just shaking your head, nodding your head or shaking it at different times to acknowledge that you are in this conversation and you are following along. Another thing that is very powerful, because at least in the USA, you might be watching somewhere else in the world, but in the USA, we have people from all over the world that we work with. Some of them have accents. Some of them, let's say in different English-speaking countries, have a word that is fully valid in their country, let's say Britain, but here in the United States, it means something very different. So if I told a British friend, hey, I'm going to go get some pants. Well, pants in Britain means rubbish. It's terrible. That's pants. So you need to summarize as you go along, particularly as the leader when you need to really know what's happening. So from time to time, you can stop and say, okay, so you're telling me that this project is way behind and none of the project managers have realized that yet. Why is that? And they'll say, no, that's not really what I'm saying. What I am saying is that the project is behind because of the way the project managers are doing it. So when you summarize, you have dropped a pin onto the conversation in such a way that you can get clarification and make sure you and the people you're speaking with have an exact understanding of what's going on. Now, the last thing too I'll point out there about empathizing is something that you have to learn to do as a manager, okay? The person sitting next to you who's your peer, you can empathize with them too, but it's a skill that we need to differentiate from sympathizing, okay? So what is sympathizing? Sympathizing is when you express a summary of your feelings for a situation and also express a degree of agreement with that person, okay? So if one of my team comes in and says, I just flipping hate working with this particular team. They're always so abrasive and dismissive, and it's just always an ordeal. If I sympathize with that person on my team, I'll be like, yeah, they suck. I just would rather not work with them. Sympathizing, well, because I'm a manager, that implies that I'm going to take action about the emotion that we are sharing, okay? Empathizing is different. Empathizing is simply restating what the emotion is and recognizing the emotion. But it's being careful not to say that you're going to put any obligation on yourself to do something about it. So if I said, yeah, the people on that team are always so difficult to work with. I totally feel your frustration. That doesn't imply that I, as the team manager, am going to go over to the next building and have an argument with their team manager, right? I've empathized, and when people's emotional condition are acknowledged, that makes them feel better. On the other hand, let's say you're in a dating relationship with someone, just see how things go when you tell them in a situation that they're really emotional about. Tell them, oh, don't feel that way, or don't be that. Boy, oh boy, it's going to get hot, because when you deny somebody's emotional condition, that amplifies, exaggerates, and makes it so much worse, okay? So this is the kind of thing that can help you as a life skill to just say, oh, okay, let me summarize. In your head, you think, let me summarize. So you're telling me that someone you thought was a really good friend of yours has betrayed you. And they're like, yes. And then they start talking about how horrible it is and how they feel terrible. And then you say, oh, okay, I get it. This is, I don't have a lot of friends. I can't imagine how bad I would feel if one of my friends did that to me. And your partner will be like, they'll actually let out a sigh of relief. I mean, this is measurable. The science shows us. When people feel acknowledged, they release tension. They go, yes, it's so hard. I'm really struggling with this. So never deny someone's emotional condition. Just say, if nothing else, if you can't say anything else, just say what you think that condition is. So you're really frustrated with this, or so you're really angry at them? That will really help the situation. Another thing to do as a manager is when things are not going well with someone on your team, you have to defeat one of the common elements of discomfort, which is a very pregnant pause in a conversation where no one is saying anything. A lot of people will bend over backwards to fill a few brief moments of silence. There have been studies on this that show 2 seconds of silence in a conversation feels more like 12 seconds to the people who are waiting for something to be said. So as a person who may have to correct the behavior of someone on your team, allow a thoughtful silence to hang in the air. Don't try to fill it up. Because if you're trying to maneuver the person on your team to making the right decision in such a way that they don't feel like you're forcing them, you can actually ask them a question about the right decision and just let the silence hang in the air. So it's like, okay, so you're saying we're behind on this project. How much time is needed to make up that difference? And they give you numbers like, do you think you and our teammates can get that done by the deadline? And they might say, oh, I don't know. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. It's like, well, what if we actually all worked overtime on that? And your employee might hedge. You know, like, I don't want to speak for anybody else. Let the silence sit. And they will eventually get uncomfortable enough to do the right thing. Yeah, I guess if we all work Saturday, we can get it done, or maybe we could all put in 2 hours extra a day for the rest of the week and we can meet the deadline. Okay, then, that sounds great. Great plan of action. Let's touch bases on this tomorrow and make sure everybody on the team knows this, and we'll go from there. So that's a very powerful skill once you learn it. Team goals. This is a big deal too. And I've got some general tips and tricks here, but I'm going to speak to those of you who are directly DBAs. If you are a DBA, or maybe just a systems admin, I shouldn't say just, maybe your role is systems admin or network admin or email admin, what have you. Many, many times administrative teams don't really have specific goals. Your job is kind of summarized as make sure the servers don't crash, and if they do, get them back up quick, right? So I've actually done another presentation specifically about the best practices of teams who are administrators and how they become successful and the kind of goals they set for themselves. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, I can point you to a video as well as additional hard goal-oriented things, just like SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, or relevant, and then timely goals. So one of the things that mistakes I've seen teams make is they'll set a goal. Like one thing that happened to me, because I speak publicly for my company, this was at a different company in the past, but they had given me a goal to help achieve a revenue number. Well, here's the thing. Nothing I do is going to help this company achieve a revenue number today. I might introduce you to our products. You might do a demo 2 months from now, and you might buy sometime in the next year. But I cannot affect that outcome. So eventually I was able to get those goals changed as a technology evangelist, that I should do a certain number of activities per quarter, because if I'm running behind, I can simply sign up for another webinar to present, or I can write another article, or I could do something else that I'm responsible to deliver. So make sure when you set your goals that they are actually things that you have direct control over. So again, that's called the information management maturity model. And there's a set of steps that they tell you, you need to be doing this particular thing at this stage in your maturity as a team. And if you're not doing that, you cannot jump to the next level of maturity, okay? So another thing I'll also throw out is that if you're on a dev team, I sure hope you're using Agile and Scrum practices. That makes the whole question of goals very, very direct and simple, okay? Also, if you're on a DBA or administrative team, my first recommendation is to learn what is normal about the systems under your purview. So if nobody's put a goal on you, above you, except keep this stuff running well, then start monitoring as much as you can to learn about what your busy days, time of the day is, your busy days of the month are, the difference between your low and your high activity points, and learn all about the aspects of what you manage. That should be your first goal if you have nothing else, because you can't tell what's abnormal if you don't know what's normal. So you have to learn those kinds of aspects of your system. Okay? Now, I'll give you just a moment to around if you have to deal with something that's gone wrong with one of your team members, and you have to do some corrective coaching. So the first thing is, don't focus on personality traits or character traits. Okay, that would be like, Tanita, you're so talkative. Our meetings never finish in time when you're talking. Well, that's personal. That's kind of hurtful. And a lot of people know about their negative character traits. And they're like, I can't really change who I am. So, piss off. On the other hand, if you focus on a specific behavior and what it does to the team, people usually respond well to that kind of corrective behavior. So instead of saying, Tanita, you're so talkative, I need you to stop. Instead say, Tanita, when you get on a roll in our team meetings, which we don't have often, we don't get them finished in time. And we only hold these meetings when they're really important. So that means really important stuff isn't happening. You think you could, just reel it in a little bit in our team meeting, approach it that way. Another specific technique you can use is something called the sandwich correction. Okay. And what that means is you put the corrective request in between two compliments. Okay. And that really helps the medicine go down. So you would say something like, Tanita, I love the way you're doing the documentation. It's so great. And everybody thinks it's the most valuable documentation they've ever read on a project. However, that ability for you to really write great things is getting in the way of our team meetings. We need to wrap those up in time. So if you could, hold off on a lot of talk and kind of think of it like your documentation. So here's the other compliment. Think of it like your documentation. All of that has a purpose, right? You're doing it for a reason. And so if you could maintain your conversations in our team meetings to be like your documentation, then we'll get through all of this perfectly. So just try and focus on that for me. And she's like, well, I enjoy talking. It's like, absolutely. Hang out with team members afterwards and, go to lunch, do what have you. But we need to get through our meetings in a particular period of time. The other thing, too, is to always explicitly follow up. So in this case of the example I was just reeling off, you might say, and let's talk about this, too, after our next team meeting. Let's see how you feel. Did it work out okay? And so our next team meeting is going to be on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Let's discuss it. If things don't go well, you set another explicit follow-up in which it's just the two of you talking about it and see what you can do to improve the situation. Okay? Now, I'm going to talk about motivating teams, and I'm giving a very small amount of information here. Take note, solarwinds.com/events, and there's some buttons on the left-hand side. So if you only get SolarWinds/events, you can check the button for databases, and you can check the button for me as a speaker, and you'll see everything I've got coming up. So the first of those sessions on influence and motivation is tomorrow. And also, if you register, you can see the recordings as well. So there's several things that coaches do really well that makes their team feel motivated. And I was reviewing this information before the session today, and I was really kind of cracking up because I've been watching a show called Ted Lasso, and Ted Lasso does all of these things, but he does them in a kind of a funny country boy sort of way. And he's great at cultivating self-esteem, like praising people for things they did well and saying that's what we need every week, those kind of things. We talked about just a moment ago on number 2, how you want to focus on behaviors, not personality traits that can't be changed, but behaviors that can. and what the outcome means, the negative behavior perhaps, or a positive, I just love how you're out there greeting everyone, and our team needs to have a high profile. So I love what you're doing. The outcome from that is ... Our credibility with other teams has gone way up. Keep doing that. Another thing too is when you ask something of your team members, communicate the benefits. What's in it for me? So, if you have a team member who's ambitious, you ask them to take on a project, remind them what's in it for them is success at showing initiative and leadership and the ability to navigate complex situations. And this is going to help them get their next promotion, right? That's what's in it for you. And we talked about questioning and listening skills. Now, there's one more thing too with motivators. Okay? And it's interesting. This is a little bit older research from a company called Blessing and White, and they do technical training. That's their whole shtick. And the data was collected across technology professionals, but not just our kind of technology professionals. So their questionnaires hit thousands of people, and some of them were chemical engineers or electrical engineers. Some of them were robotics people and things like. So it's a broader scope than just us as data people, data technologists. But I think it applies when you see what these motivators are. The first is autonomy. Like, don't tell me exactly how to do something. Just tell me what you want me to do, and I'll figure out how to do it. Another thing we're seeing is a lot of people are saying, oh, you want me to come back into the office after this pandemic? But there's another company over here that's offering me the same work. Maybe there's a raise or not, but I get to work from home. I'm going over there, right? So autonomy is a big deal for us who are in technology. Achievement is also a big deal. So think of it this way when we talk about these motivators. If you were trying to lure someone to work for you on your team compared to working for one of your peers' teams, frame each of these in that I'm trying to pull them over from another team in my company. So you said, oh, you can work from home on my team. Well, a lot of people would jump ship and come to your team. Or if you said, oh, I'm not a micromanager. You can decide how you want to do things, and I'm going to just check on the progress of what you were doing. The same thing with achievement. If one of your peers leads a team that has been working on an ERP migration that's taken 2 years, you don't have achievements along the way that you can kind of brag about or share. On the other hand, if the team you manage has frequent milestones that can mark an achievement, as a manager, you should be praising those achievements and helping to build the prestige of your team members and their accomplishments. And that really makes a big difference. Somebody says, oh, yeah, you guys have been marking a series of successes. I think I'd rather work on your team than this team here that hasn't done anything anybody has praised for a couple of years. Another aspect, keeping current or avoiding burnout. So this is kind of about work-life balance for technologists. All of us live with a version number, right? You might be great with SQL Server 2014, but what have you done for me lately, right? As Janet Jackson says in her song. So yeah, keeping current is hard to do. And if you, as a boss, say, you know what, we devote 4 hours every other week to just training and study, and we do it as a group, that would make a lot of people really interested in your team, okay? Or avoiding burnout. You don't have to work more than 40 hours a week. We automate so much stuff that even that is a little bit of a stretch, Professional prestige or identification. Again, people want to be associated with winners. People want to be on teams that have laudable achievements. And so if you can do some things like that, even just building out your own little awards for your team and praising your team publicly in the Slack channel of your different group, that kind of stuff really encourages your team and makes the people love that team. The best way to give praise, by the way, is not directly to the person who did it. it's to praise that person on your team in the to another outsider of the team, but in their presence where they can overhear you. So you as the leader of the database management team get a chance to talk to the leader of the SAN team and your best DBAs over here. You'd be like, hey, have you seen all these cool things that Bill is doing? It is amazing. I'm really proud of the work he's doing. Well, the other manager would be like, Bill's cool. I enjoy working with him. But Bill, overhearing this, would be like, holy crap, I could float on that for a day, right? It's the best thing that's happened to him. So yes, do praise, but assign prestige, to the different members of your team. Figure out milestones that show success, and then put those out in the public eye, and give your team a reason to celebrate. Teams that celebrate together are much more cohesive. And finally, a community of support and sharing. So a team where if one of you is sick and everybody's like, oh man, that's too bad. I'm sorry you're sick. See you on Monday, as opposed to a team that's like, hey, do you need me to bring a meal? Everything covered with your kids? Can I help? Teams like that, again, are more cohesive and motivate people to be attracted to join your team, okay? It's all predicated on trust. And you have to trust them, they have to trust you. And that brings up this idea of the law of reciprocity. It's something that sociologists and organizational behavioralists study. And what happens is people tend to give back to you what you give back to them. So just like the dictatorial leader who wants to own everything and control it, well, they're going to get those sentiments and behaviors reciprocated, where people will be like, oh no, I don't want to take any new responsibility on for you, because A, you'll snatch it out of my hands at just the wrong time. B, you'll take credit for everything. So I'm going to reciprocate to your negativity with negativity. Same thing goes for positivity. If you express positive behaviors, you do things like, I'm going to actively trust you to get this done. They will in turn give that back to you. My friend Buck Woody tells a good story about how when he was in the Air Force, they were behind on a particular project. He had cleared some leave with his superior. So he left the base, even though they were behind on this project. And when he came back, not very late, he saw that his boss was at a computer terminal doing his work for him. And he was like, wow, I am very endeared to this leader now. And so when the leader later on asked Buck to do more, Buck was like, absolutely. I've seen you do that for me, and I'm going to reciprocate. Well, we have 4 minutes left, and I still have quite a few slides. So I hope you can hang with me for just a couple more minutes as we talk about some best practices. One thing that I learned the hard way, and you'll see in study after study, like SolarWinds, we just released a study of database and data professional habits and activities. And then the year before that, we had one on developers. And one of the things they both said in common was, I need blocks of uninterrupted time to get my work done. It takes 20 to 40 minutes for me to get into flow. And again, that's a researched back statistic. And so it took me 20 minutes to context switch into this big T-SQL query tuning project I'm doing. But then I have to get up and go a half an hour into it to a meeting. And then I come back 20 to 40 minutes to get back into flow, and then lunch. And then I come back, and then 20 to 40 minutes to get back into flow. So each time I context switch, I just totally lose productivity. And one of the things I used to do in my early days as a leader is I would book morning meetings at 10, afternoon meetings at 2 or maybe 3, basically slicing the morning and the afternoon in half. And when I learned about this whole concept of flow and productivity, what I started to do was I would put the meeting just before or just after lunch. So you're not in flow, we're not interrupting you with a context switch. So keep that in mind. Another thing to do is make sure that you know what your team is about and what its core and principal value is. The reason I say that is because once you know your core and principal value, all of the hype that comes from these technology companies and their new releases no longer has the kind of pull to make you do something maybe you shouldn't do. You know, there's this whole idea that we as technologists are like, ooh, shiny, and we go to the new thing. So like when I worked at NASA, I was on the team that built the water recycling system in the International Space Station. And our core value as a team was safety and security, because human beings can't live without water for long. So we had to make sure that everything was triple verified, quadruple, quintuple verified, and that it was always going to be completely safe for the astronauts. Later, I went to one of the big four accounting firms. And so in that situation, what do accountants care about? It's money, right? So I had to make sure everything we spent on was a very, very reasonable and frugal expenditure of money, good cost for value ratio, and that it would be a good return on the investment. Then I went to software development companies, and there the two core values were speed to market and increasing revenue. So in each of these cases, if someone came in and said, hey, I want to buy this hot new SAN over here, and it's going to cost $200,000, and it's going to make our world so much better. Or I want us to upgrade to SQL Server 2022. It's going to make us so much better. It's like, okay, well, I don't know anything about what this product is or does, but if it supports my core team value, well, that won't make our databases for water recycling any safer or any more effective or high quality. So I'd be like, I'm neutral on that. If we have budget, okay, I can support it. But if we don't, I'm not going to stick my neck out for that. On the other hand, with the software development company, if this helps us get our products developed a lot faster out into market, helps us sell more, then I'll be like, let's spend the money today, because I don't even know anything about the SAN, but I know what our values are. And because of that, I can stay on track for what our team needs to accomplish. So sometimes when we don't know that, we'll get fixated on some cool new shiny thing, and it'll take us off the track. Also, mitigating weaknesses rather than leveraging strengths. So here's another thing that I learned the hard way, is that think of your team, I didn't at the time, but think of your team like a Marvel superheroes movie. Invariably, the hero has friends and allies who have strengths that complement rather than duplicate what the hero has. Think of your team that way. If you have somebody who's an exceptionally good coder, help them become an even better coder, because they can become 2 and 3 and 4 times better. On the other hand, if you have someone on your team who's not a really good communicator, it's going to take a lot of work to fix a weakness, whereas it takes much less work and energy to amplify a strength. And this is what athletics performance coaches teach too. If you're a great hitter, don't focus on, in baseball, don't focus on spending all your time on becoming a mediocre runner, because that won't change the course of your games. But if you're a good hitter and you become a great hitter, you're going to be winning a lot more games. Because if you hit home runs, it doesn't matter how fast you run the bases, right? So focus on each of your team members. If they have 1 or 2 strengths and they're complementary, great. Encourage them to leverage those strengths and train them up. But don't worry too much about weaknesses if there's someone on the team that has a complementary strength in the area where other members of the team might be weak. Okay, aligning with the business. This is probably the biggest issue that I see with people who are new to management, is sometimes they don't really realize who the real boss is. It took me a while as a DBA to realize that my actual boss, the person who I reported to on the org chart, wasn't really my true boss. My true boss was the customers I was servicing and their leader. If the leader of that particular group wasn't happy, he'd call my boss and my boss would bust my chops, right? So the person who pulled the strings wasn't my boss. And so you need to align with the people who are in a position to influence your life and make it very negative or very positive. Another key thing you need to do when you're spending time thinking about this is figure out, is this person rational or are they emotional? If that leader is rational, you can use detail-based appeals. You can show them data and they'll agree with your conclusions because the data shows that. But it's a whole different ballgame if they are driven by certain sets of emotions, okay? Fortunately, we don't have a long time to drill into this, but this will be covered in the session in which I talk about persuasion and influence, okay? Another thing I encourage you to do is to have a conversation with your boss and ask them, ask them, what do you need to be successful? What do you have to show on your list of accomplishments for the year to get a bonus? And if you report directly to them, then and you help them achieve those goals, they're going to love you. It's going to be a good relationship. All right. And one last thing, I'm just going to mention quickly here. You want to communicate, and you want to do it regularly, whether you're asked to communicate or not. In the absence of communication, people will start rumors. Another thing I want to encourage people to do is to be a cheerleader and take credit for your team. The best way to brag is to not brag on yourself, but to talk about to other leaders, peers, how great your team is. I am really, really proud of how well these people pulled together and did these amazing things for our customers. It's great. If you said, I'm really glad how I led this team to this amazing outcome, people are going to think you're arrogant. So avoid that, okay? So that's what I'm talking about here. It's for the team, not for you. Oh, and also, this blank here, my animation didn't work. We communicate even when we say nothing. So it is very important to understand, particularly in emotionally important situations, that you be the first person to speak up in an encouraging or supportive way, particularly in emotional situations. So let's say, for example, and this is an old kind of scenario. I don't think we probably do find this in America today, now that I think of it. But I was in Europe visiting some customers in a country in Eastern Europe where there aren't really any kind of harassment laws. And one team leader, a manager, I thought was a very stand-up and ethical person. I walked by one of the cubicles of one of their team members, and they had a picture of a woman in a bikini up in their cubicle. And I said, what's that about? Like, oh, some of the people on the team like to do that kind of stuff. So what do you think everybody else, potential female employees, would think about this organization? Well, they think that this manager has no problem with this at all, right? They are communicating a boatload of information by not saying anything, okay? So that's why I say, particularly in situations where there is an ethical component or a moral component, or it's very significant in terms of the amount of work and energy people have to put into a particular thing. If you might normally not say anything, you better step up and say something, because that will set the tone for the entire situation, okay? All right. So one last bit, couple analogies. And the further you move up in the organization, the more analogies you need to employ, and the more jargon for your technology you need to step away from. The first is the physics analogy, which is, there are these the laws of thermodynamics. And so one of the laws of thermodynamics says, the law of inertia says, an object at rest tends to stay at rest unless acted upon by an external force. In the same way, we have the law of momentum that says an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by an external force. So if you imagine a small round snowball at the top of a snowy hill, nothing is moving that ball, that snowball. It's in a state of inertia. But then somebody moves it and it starts rolling down the hill, picking up speed, picking up snow. Well, believe it or not, positive interactions with people work that way too. And your ability to influence others works that way too. So to influence your team, one of the things you might do to break the state of inertia, particularly when you're brand new, is to ask the team to do something they already do. Maybe change the format a little, but something that's almost not asking for something. Now there's a bit of momentum and them responding positively to your requests. And so build from that little seed to where you finally ask bigger things from them. Everybody's used to it. Everybody sees the value of it, and so it works out well. There's also a banking analogy about building political capital, making deposits into your political capital bank account, and you can run a deficit. You can experience depreciation, where if you don't use it after a while, it starts to decline. Again, not going to spend too much time on that. Okay, so wrapping things up, you all know this. Our technology skills don't equal leadership skills, but leadership skills can be learned and added to your toolkit. Absolutely, takes practice. Remember the law of reciprocity. What you show to others, you are very likely to receive in kind. Protect and value your team's productivity, and showed a lot of steps for you to do that. Utilize your team's motivations for best results. Some of them might like that achievement. Others might like the sense of team spirit. We'll focus on giving them those things so that they can be encouraged to get more of that in the future. And then evaluate success against goals and the values of your team. If you haven't set those yet, then that's a big part of the next things you should do. Okay, so with that, I have some suggested reading that you might want to take a look on, some really good ones. And then also, I have some resources you can follow up on. For example, some of my favorite websites. PASS has a whole bunch of really good videos on PASS TV. And also, there's a lot of written content out there as well. So again, here's the URL if you want to join me for the influence and persuasion sessions. You can email me, Kevin Kline, solarwinds.com. You can reach out to me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and social media. And with that, I apologize for running over, but I'd like to ask Kevin to open the floor in case that, or Kevin, if you've seen any questions come up in the chat, we'll take a few minutes and answer those now.
No, actually, at this time, there have been no questions come up, but I actually have a question myself. Do you find it better as a leader to work on big overarching items or focus on smaller things?
Right. So that really depends on, well, that's the correct answer to all technology questions. So let's begin with that. It depends, right? It depends a little bit on your position in the org. So if you're at the team leader level, then you're probably very often going to be working on the smaller details. In fact, it might be that your main role as a team leader is just to kind of consolidate all the communication going upward from your team and coming downward from leaders higher up in the hierarchy. So in that case, you need to continue to refine your skills as a technologist. But once you get above that kind of team level, maybe you have some budget authority, maybe you influence multiple teams. It doesn't have to be a direct influence, but you lead one team and it has an impact on multiple others. Then at that point, you do actually need to begin to build out some strategies and do some planning and kind of know what you want to happen over the horizon several months down the line. I'm not sure if that is what you meant by big overarching things, but that's the first thing that popped into my mind. How much time on tactical things versus strategic things? And so if you're just starting your progression into leadership, you probably are going to be 80% tactical. Once you start to move up or start getting invited to a lot of different management-driven initiatives, it's at that point that you want to start integrating a lot more strategy. And maybe you go to about 50-50 at that point. Yeah, good question.
That was great answer. I like that idea.
The flip side, though, is a question I mentioned way earlier in the session, which is a lot of managers are like, I've been asked to do a lot of managerial things. I'm enjoying it. I'm finding it's rewarding, but I could spend all my time on this. And in fact, at the end of the day, I still need to be technical, and I'm starting to get a little rusty. What do I do to keep my skills sharp? Again, it depends. If you have enough time on your schedule, then you could definitely take part in deadline-driven technical things that your team are doing. So if you're a leader of a dev team, absolutely continue to write code. Maybe not the biggest clumps of it, because you've got a lot of meetings that are going to really interfere with a long block of dedicated time to coding, but definitely still keep yourself on the project plan, on the Gantt chart, the critical path. In my case, when I went from team lead of the database administrators to the manager of architecture, what I found I had to do at that point to continue to keep my technical skills sharp is I had to create specific projects that would help the team accomplish their goals, but that were not on the critical path. So some examples of that is I wrote a bunch of things that would automate reporting and would automate different things. That wasn't part of the required deliverables, but I knew by getting those things done, it would actually free up a lot of everybody's time on the team. And so in that situation, I was still writing a lot of code, but I was able to go at my own pace as I had time and keep my skills sharp, but also still be almost full-time on the management and strategy of that team.
And I think that's the question we all have to ask ourselves. Which side do we want to work the most on? Do we want to be the manager or be the worker, or how much of both? And you definitely have to work on the situation you're in and the group you're with.
Yes.
And
I'm sorry, Kevin, go on.
I was going to say, I think that all makes a huge difference in how you play, because I know with the group I'm currently with, I have some more junior developers, so I have to be more of a hands-on manager. Where other places I've managed, they're more senior, so I can back off and be more on the strategy side.
Absolutely. And it, like you said, it depends on the people you're with, and what do you find rewarding? Okay, so in the very beginning, the premise I put forward is a lot of us move into management because that's our next good opportunity to increase our wage. Well, at the end of the day, if you hate what you're doing and you make 10 grand more a year, it's not even $1,000 a month here in the States, it may not be worth making that job change to get the promotion. If at the end of the day you love tuning a database and seeing this query or this massive report go from an hour and 17 minutes down to 27 seconds, and that feels good, you're not going to get much of that when you move into a higher level manager role. So, think about what it is that kind of energizes you. If, on the other hand, you feel great whenever you get to praise one of your team members in a kind of a public setting, maybe it's in Slack or Teams or something like, it's like, hey, Janice, my coder over here, took this report from an hour and 17 minutes down to 27 seconds. If that makes you feel great, then you may really enjoy management. But I find that there's often, just as our Venn diagrams don't really overlap very much, there's often a pretty distinct differentiation between those of us who love technology work and those of us who love people-oriented management work.
Amen. So with that, I don't have any questions coming out of the group. So Kevin, I do thank you for all this time. This has been a wonderful presentation. Definitely things to think about. I know for everyone on the call, I'm not less than myself.
Always good to talk with you, Kevin. I appreciate your time.
Oh, my pleasure. So with that, we do thank everyone for coming. This session will be out there to view again later on this week. If not to later today. With John, it's usually later today. So with that, I do thank everyone.